Ranger was already running before Sarah understood what she was seeing. Not trotting, not moving with the quiet, measured calm she had come to recognize over 5 days of watching him carefully. Running, full speed across the open yard with his ears flat and his body low and his eyes locked on something near the fence line that Sarah couldn't yet see from the porch. Lucy was there, standing near the tall grass with a plastic toy horse in her hand, completely unaware, her back to the dog closing the distance between them in seconds. Sarah's laundry basket hit the porch floor. She was already moving, already screaming her daughter's name, already knowing with the sick certainty that lives in the center of every mother's chest that she was too far away, that whatever was happening was going to happen before she could reach them, before she could stop it, before she could do anything at all except watch. Ranger hit Lucy from the side, not violently, but with enough force to knock her completely off balance. Lucy stumbled. The plastic horse flew from her hand. Before the little girl could fall, Ranger's jaws closed around the back of her denim jacket and yanked her backward across the grass in one sharp motion. Sarah heard herself screaming words she couldn't later remember, because from 20 yards away, with her heart detonating inside her chest, what she was watching looked exactly like an attack. The military dog, her daughter, the movement that every warning she had ever heard had told her to fear. Then she heard the sound. A dry, papery hiss from the grass. Then something struck the earth once, twice, then silence so complete it felt wrong. Sarah reached Lucy and pulled her up and spun away from the fence without fully understanding why her body had decided to move in that direction. Lucy was crying, frightened, not hurt, her small arms locked around her mother's neck. Sarah turned back. The rattlesnake was coiled in the flattened grass exactly where Lucy had been standing, brown and nearly invisible against the earth. Its head was still moving, recalibrating, and its attention had shifted entirely to the dog, now positioned between it and the child. Ranger was bleeding, a dark stain spreading down his front leg. He didn't make a sound, didn't retreat a single step. He stood there with his body forming a wall between the snake and Lucy, his eyes fixed, his breathing steady, every line of him communicating something that had nothing to do with instinct and everything to do with a decision made in the space of a heartbeat. The snake struck again. Ranger moved just enough. The second fang caught his shoulder. Still, he didn't move back. Sarah was shaking so hard she could barely hold Lucy. She pressed her daughter's face into her shoulder and watched the dog she had almost returned to the shelter the night before absorb a second strike without flinching, without breaking, without leaving the ground he had chosen to hold. The snake retreated slowly into the grass and disappeared. Ranger stood for one more moment. Then his legs gave, and he went down into the grass and didn't move again. Welcome to State of Valor, where we tell the stories of warriors who never stopped serving, even when the world stopped watching. The night before, after Lucy was asleep and the house had gone quiet, Sarah had sat across the kitchen table from her husband and said the thing she had been carrying for days. "Ethan, I don't think we made the right decision." He looked up from his coffee and waited. He had always been good at that, at making space for hard words without rushing them. Everyone at the shelter said it. Sarah looked toward the dark hallway. Somewhere down there, Ranger was lying outside Lucy's bedroom door, the way he had every night since they brought him home. Military dogs are unpredictable, not suited for homes with small children. I didn't want to believe them, but... "He hasn't done anything wrong," Ethan said quietly. "I know that. 5 days, not one thing. I know. She pressed her hands flat against the table. But what if I'm wrong about him? What if one morning something triggers something in him, and Lucy is too close, and we can't— Her voice caught. She stopped, started again more quietly. I would never forgive myself. Ethan reached across the table and covered her hands with his. He didn't argue, didn't push, just held her hands and looked at her until she looked back. "One more week," he said. "If anything changes at all, we figure it out together." She had nodded, gone to bed still uncertain, still afraid, still carrying the low, persistent weight of a doubt she couldn't entirely put down. She would carry the memory of that conversation for the rest of her life, not with shame, with something that had no clean name, the particular feeling of loving someone so much that your fear almost cost them the thing that was going to save them. Montana Cole had come home from the Navy 3 years earlier with a single duffel bag and very little else that anyone could see. 21 years as a SEAL had left marks on him that photographs didn't capture. He slept lightly. He sat with his back to walls in restaurants without thinking about it. He noticed exits. He woke before sunrise every morning, not because of an alarm, but because his body had long ago decided that anything resembling vulnerability was a risk it couldn't accept. Montana was supposed to help. The mountains helped. The space helped. The silence helped during the day. At night, the silence had a way of filling with things he hadn't invited in. The faces of men he had served with, decisions that couldn't be undone, the strange, particular grief of a life built entirely around a clear purpose, suddenly having no purpose at all. Most mornings he sat on the porch with coffee and watched the light arrive on the ridgeline and tried to locate something he kept losing, a sense of forward motion, a feeling of mattering. He had spent 2 decades knowing exactly what he was for, and nothing had yet arrived to replace that knowledge with anything solid. Lucy helped more than anything else. She had her mother's laugh and her father's absolute refusal to accept no as a final answer. And she met every morning like it was holding something remarkable waiting to be found. She was the only person who could pull him entirely out of his own head without saying a single word about what was happening in there. She had wanted a dog with the relentless specific focus that 4-year-olds bring to the things they decide are necessary. At breakfast, at dinner, from the back seat of the truck, in the cereal aisle at the grocery store. "Daddy, a dog! Please, Daddy! Daddy, please, a dog!" He had driven to the shelter not expecting anything in particular. The shepherd mix in the corner kennel hadn't pressed against the gate like the others. He had simply sat in the back of his space and watched Ethan with a stillness that felt less like an animal reading a stranger and more like a veteran reading a room. Calm, measuring, present without being loud about it. The shelter worker had opened the folder without being asked. Military working dog. Special operations support, decorated service record, retired after injury, adopted once by a good family, owner passed away, returned to the shelter, 8 months, nobody had come for him. Nobody wanted him. Ethan had knelt on the concrete floor without planning to. He wasn't sure what he expected. The dog crossed the kennel slowly and placed his head against Ethan's knee with the quiet directness of an animal that had decided, after careful consideration, that trust was still worth trying. Something moved in Ethan's chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Not sentimentality, recognition. The particular thing you feel when you look at someone who has been shaped by the same forces that shaped you and come out the other side still standing. He didn't say anything meaningful. He didn't need to. "We'll take him," he told the shelter worker. The emergency veterinary hospital was 53 miles.
away. Sarah drove. Ethan sat in the back with Ranger's head resting in his lap. Lucy was beside them, with her small hand pressed flat against the dog's side, feeling for each breath, the way Ethan was counting each one without moving. Nobody spoke for the first 20 miles. The mountains moved past the windows. The road was straight and empty, and the afternoon light was starting to go golden, the way it does in Montana in the early evening, beautiful and indifferent to everything happening beneath it. Then Lucy's voice came quietly from beside him. "Daddy, is Ranger going to die?" Ethan looked at his daughter. She was watching him with the clear, patient honesty that children carry before the world teaches them that some questions are better left softened. He didn't look away from her. "I don't know, sweetheart." She nodded slowly, absorbed it, then turned back to Ranger and moved her hand up to his neck very gently and rested it there without saying anything else. Ranger's tail moved once, a single slow sweep against the seat. Sarah made a sound from the front seat that Ethan felt more than heard. He turned back to the window. The mountains blurred slightly. He blinked and they came clear again. For the first time in 21 years of training for every imaginable situation, he was sitting inside one he had no preparation for. No experience translated here, no discipline applied. All he could do was keep one hand on the dog's side and count the breaths and ask for things he had stopped asking for a long time ago. The veterinary team took Ranger through the doors, and the family sat in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and worn upholstery and time moving too slowly. Lucy fell asleep against Ethan's shoulder within the hour. Sarah held his hand. Neither of them spoke much because there wasn't much to say that wouldn't make the waiting harder. When the veterinarian finally came out, her expression was careful until she was close enough for Ethan to read her eyes properly. Then he knew it wasn't the worst kind of news. "He made it through the first critical stage," she said. Sarah closed her eyes. The breath she had released had been held for 2 hours.
"He's not out of danger. The venom load was significant. The next 12 hours will determine a great deal." The doctor paused. "But he is fighting." Ethan nodded. "What are his chances?" "Better than they should be." She looked at him steadily. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "He was a military working dog?" "Yes." She looked back toward the treatment room for a moment. "After the second strike, most animals break. It's pure instinct, self-preservation." She shook her head slightly. "He didn't move. He held his position through both strikes with the child behind him." Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth. The veterinarian looked at Ethan quietly. "I've worked with animals for 20 years. What that dog did tonight wasn't instinct." "What was it?" Ethan asked. She answered without any hesitation at all. "It was character." They sent Sarah and Lucy home near midnight. Ethan stayed. He sat in a chair beside Ranger's recovery bed in a small room off the main treatment area. The machines tracked their quiet rhythms. The dog was wrapped in a blanket, with tubes running from his leg, his chest rising and falling in a slow, deliberate pattern that Ethan watched without looking away for a very long time. The room was completely still. At some point, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and took out the challenge coin he had carried for 19 years. It was worn smooth on one side from handling. The trident on the face was still sharp. He had carried it through training, through deployments, through days that had no names he could say out loud. He had pressed it into the hands of brothers at funerals and received it back from hands that trembled. It meant something that language had never been large enough to hold. He set it gently on the blanket beside Ranger's paw. The dog stirred, One eye opened slowly and found Ethan's face and stayed there. Ethan leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "After the first strike, you could have run, and nobody would have blamed you." Ranger blinked slowly. "She's okay. Lucy's okay." Ethan's throat tightened. "You did it, brother." The machine beeped softly. Outside, the Montana night was black and full of stars. 21 years, Ethan said quietly. "I thought I understood what service cost." He looked at the coin beside the dog's paw, looked back at Ranger. "You just finished teaching me." His eyes were burning. He let them. There was no one here to perform strength for, and he was long past the age of pretending it made him less of anything. "You've got my 6, he said. "You always will." Ranger's eye closed slowly. The room stayed quiet, and Ethan Cole, who had not prayed with any real conviction since the last funeral at Arlington, bowed his head and prayed for a dog, for a forgotten warrior who had given the last of what he had to protect the little girl sleeping miles away, for a life that deserved more years, for a little more time. Ranger came home 4 days later. Word had moved through the community the way it only moves in small towns, quietly and completely, and without anyone organizing it. Neighbors had gathered along the road without being asked. Some held American flags, some stood with their hands over their hearts. One old man in a veteran's cap stood at the end of his driveway and didn't move and didn't wave, just stood there with his chin up and his eyes wet. And that image stayed with Sarah longer than any of the others. The SUV came slowly down the road and stopped at the driveway. Ethan opened the back door. Ranger stepped out carefully, blinking in the afternoon light, his legs still carrying the memory of what they'd been through. Lucy was already running across the yard before anyone could say her name. She dropped to her knees in the grass directly in front of him and wrapped both arms around his neck and pressed her face into his fur. She stayed like that for a long moment, and she said something, very quietly, that only Ranger could hear. Whatever it was, his tail began to move, slowly at first, then with growing certainty, then with the full, unhesitating sweep of an animal that has remembered what it means to belong somewhere. Ethan stood beside the truck and didn't move for a long time. He watched his daughter and his dog in the afternoon light and felt something settle inside him that had been restless for 3 years. Not happiness exactly, though it lived close to happiness. Something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of a man who had spent a long time wondering whether the best of his life was already behind him, finding the answer in a front yard in Montana on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't behind him. It was right here. That evening, after dinner, after Lucy had fallen asleep with Ranger stretched out beside her bed in his usual place, Ethan sat on the porch in the dark. Sarah brought coffee and sat beside him and rested her head against his shoulder, and neither of them said anything for a long time because the evening didn't require words. The stars were out in full over the mountains. Somewhere in the grass below the fence line, the night moved quietly through the things that lived there. Ethan held his coffee with both hands and breathed the cold, clean Montana air and felt, for the first time since he had come home from the war, that home was exactly the right word for where he was.
Some warriors come home and the world moves on without them. They sit in shelters and wait in silence and ask for nothing because asking was never part of what they were trained to do. Ranger didn't save Lucy because he was ordered to. He saved her because the mission had become something deeper than orders. It had become love. And love, when it is real, does not calculate the cost before it acts. If this story moved something in you, share it today with someone who needs to be reminded that loyalty still exists in this world, that courage still walks among us, sometimes on four legs, sometimes forgotten, always worthy of being found. Subscribe to State of Valor, because no warrior story should ever go untold. The significant educational value in this story reaches across several important truths. Military working dogs serve the United States Armed Forces in some of the most dangerous conditions imaginable, detecting explosives, tracking enemy combatants, and protecting the lives of special operations soldiers in ways that rarely receive public recognition. When these dogs retire, thousands face uncertain futures, spending months and sometimes years in shelters because potential adopters fear their history without understanding it. Adoption programs exist specifically to place these animals into loving homes, and this story reflects the very real experience of families who discover that a dog shaped by service often carries something extraordinary into civilian life. This story also reflects the genuine and documented challenge of veteran reintegration, the quiet loss of purpose and identity that follows a career built entirely around mission and brotherhood. Prairie rattlesnakes are a real and serious danger across Montana and the rural American West, and there are documented cases of family dogs detecting and intercepting snakes before children could be harmed. The deepest value in this story, however, is the one that cannot be measured, that those who have given everything in service to others deserve to be welcomed home, cared for, and loved, every single one of them.